Community Music Center is a non-for-profit music center. We've been here since 1921. And last year we rose over $3 million for scholarships for tuition assistance for the kids. And if you have any questions, you can visit us on sfcmc.org. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ben Spielman. I am the VP of, I don't remember my title, but I work for Sheet Music Plus, and we're very excited to have Tom Gerou here to give us a clinic on the Alfred Basic Piano Library. Alfred, I think you were telling a little bit of the history of Alfred, and actually I did not know the history of Alfred, which is really interesting. We at Sheet Music Plus, we really want to invest more in our piano teachers and in the piano market, so we're happy to have you here, and we'll be recording this as well and posting online to share with our piano teachers outside the San Francisco area so everybody can see it. So thank you for coming, Tom, and I'll leave you to it.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I want to point out what we have in our laps. To start here, there's a number of things. There's a shrink wrap packet. In sort of the second half this morning, we're going to be looking at those books. Those are the most current additions to Alfred's Basic Piano Library. And I'll talk about how the concepts can work into, in this case, popular arrangements of songs that the kids would know those songs, but they're also conceptually sound so that the students can be progressing with their lessons as well as learning some fun things that they can work with. You also have a bright orange lesson book 1A, and I will kind of bounce around in this early on this morning and just try to talk freely about beginning piano students and using this as a reference. You also have a blue sampler here, and this is, it has a number of things in it, but on page 15, we're going to start going through the Alfred's Basics section on that, and I'm going to outline the vastness of the course, because it is quite a large course to serve the needs of any student that you may have, and we'll be going through that as well, and I'll play some examples as we go along. And then finally, you have this little 4-page sheet, which has a summary of what is being learned in each of the levels of the lesson books for Alfred's Basic. So if you go, I wonder where D major is introduced as you sit here this morning, you can kind of glance, and it's in a very nutshell what is being introduced where in the course. But I will kind of guide you through a number of things. I thought we would start with something just kind of silly and fun. And that is, we're going to play a Name That Tune. I'm going to play some things and see if we can recognize the tunes, and make sure you shout it out, or I'll keep playing the whole thing over and over with repeats in every verse. Before I do that, I'd like to just say a little bit about myself. I've worked for Alfred Music for 28 years. I started as a music engraver. I am originally from North Dakota, which is one of the states in the United States. It's the one that holds Canada up from falling into the United States. And I started very, very early. My family had a rock band. And eventually they didn't have other people in the rock band, since I have 5 siblings. So we all had to learn an instrument, kind of like the Osmonds. So at age 12, I was designated as the keyboard player. Now, I'd been taking piano lessons, as my siblings had as well, and we needed a keyboard player, so one day I was put on stage and I was showed what a C major triad is, and from then on I worked every weekend until I went to college myself, which was in music. And I went on to get a bachelor's at University of Southern California in composition, and also a master's in composition at Yale University. The whole time, my emphasis was always piano. I always made a living as a ballet accompanist or accompanying people here and there, but always as a pianist, and the majority of the music I've always written has been piano music. Teaching along the way, it was a perfect fit to work at Alfred Music. I started as a music engraver right when the very first desktop PC was invented and Alfred needed to move into the digital age. And from then, I kind of moved into many, many different aspects of Alfred. Now, I'm the editor-in-chief of the piano product, of Piano Strategy, and I also have a lot of arranging and composition books. And so I'm always writing, I'm always trying to work with the students. And it's interesting from my perspective on how to present the challenges that the students will have in what they're studying, but to come up with something new, something, a current Justin Bieber hit, and try to make it workable so they can learn it, they know how to play it, they can play it well, and yet it's musically satisfying. So in one of the books that I have, which is Popular Hits, you don't have this here, but we're just going to spend a second on it. I'm going to play a few things, and I'm going to see if you can recognize the tunes, okay? Just call it out or I won't stop. Yeah, very good, very good. The tears are welling. Yeah. You know, that's sort of like the theme from Titanic. It becomes a piano teacher's nightmare because the latest hit everyone wants to play. Let's see here. Firework, okay. It took a little while, huh? Any of you know this one? You may not know the name. Just shout out if you do know the name. You recognize that from old westerns? It's from the Magnificent Seven. How about some San Francisco sounding music here? Joni Mitchell, Yellow Taxi from the 60s. It was every once in a while in doing some of these things, it's always a challenge between appealing to a young person and also appealing to their parents in the other room in an audience that they're playing. So sometimes there's some songs that are kind of forgotten by the younger generation, but they're really fun to play and they serve a really nice need. And eventually they will hear them. I just heard this 2 days ago in the background of a TV show. I was like, oh, I know that one. I could call out, name that tune on that. Let's see this. Moana, the theme for Moana. The kids will know. One of our challenges always in keeping piano lessons alive is a lot of times the kids don't necessarily relate directly to what they're learning. It just sounds different. It doesn't quite sound the same. And what we try to do is always continue with add-on books to make sure that it is relevant to the starting kids. And if it's a Disney tune, they feel like they've got an accomplishment much more than the technique. And as they progress, of course, mastering a piece will be their satisfaction. But at the beginning, they want to have a direct contact with it. Let's talk a little bit about Alfred's Basic Piano Library. There was 3 authors. One of the authors, Amanda Vic-Lethko, was a piano professor at the University of Texas in Austin. She had a bachelor's and a master's in piano performance, and she also had a bachelor in piano pedagogy. She taught pedagogy at the University of Texas. She was a very, very engaging presenter and clinician. I remember I took a tour of Australia one time, and all they could tell me is these wonderful stories about Amanda Vick staying up all night in her hotel room, describing piano and teaching and whatnot. She was quite the personality. The lead writer on the method was Willard A. Palmer, who was also a Texan. he wrote a number of different kind of methods way, way, way back before the Alfred's Basic was devised. And he excelled in accordion, for one thing. Accordion was big. Every household had an accordion. He also wrote a small guitar method. And when he had the opportunity to pursue his true love, it was in the masterworks. It was in standard repertoire, especially the Baroque and the classical periods. His attention to research and detail was really known in the industry. Alfred started a series called the Masterwork Editions, and Willard really added to those editions, eventually earning honorary doctorate awards for doing that. He was a stickler with how piano was taught, how it was interpreted, and especially as you go into the classics, all the details and the stylistic characteristics of the music needed to be taught to the students. The third author was actually the owner of Alfred Music at that time, Morty Manus. Now, he was more of a businessman. He had the musical education behind him in his earlier years. And he had two things that I find that really made Alfred successful. One was that he could see up to an intermediate student and what the challenges were, what the confusion in the concepts were. And so he worked with the other two authors who were very educated and had a passion for higher end standard repertoire, that he was able to bring it into the understanding of what teachers and children would be able to use in there. He also had, which I think was very influential, is that he had the foresight to see that not every child progresses at the same speed. Some are faster, some are slower. Some children are great sight readers, they're visual learners, but they don't understand what they're playing necessarily, but they can read everything. Some students will kind of get by their lessons by being orally coherent, and they will be able to really, once they hear the piece, they can play it, but they're not reading, and they're not understanding what they're doing as well. So when you take these different characteristics, you add on the learners that once we've worked through visual and oral, and then they're kinesthetic learners, how it feels, the touch, the motion, the musicality of it. When you combine all those, a lot of times to combine them all in an early beginning piano method would be overwhelming to a child. I worked with many, many authors over the years, many authors. And one thing that I learned is it's not always what you're showing or teaching someone, but it's what you're not going to explain until later, until it's important to understand it. If everything is introduced immediately, it becomes overwhelming to someone. Now, the difference between younger students and adult students is that very questions. Adults want to know why. Why is there an F sharp on a piano? Why isn't it always called G flat? They always want to know more because they have the capability of understanding a little bit more in what they're doing. Let's look at page 15 in this sampler. And I mentioned Morty was wonderful in really realizing that we should take, as we develop concepts, as we develop our reading approach, our theory sequencing, we can apply that in different ways to different group levels of students. So we have, for very young beginners, we have a course called the prep course. It progresses slower. We keep in mind that those young students have smaller hands, and it's going to be a number of years before their hands get big enough to play octaves. Now, if we just hand them something for an adult, it physically is not possible. I was on a judging event once, and a parent came up and she grabbed her little boy who was 5 years old, and she said, "Oh, tell me what's wrong with his hands. There's something horrible wrong with his hands." And so I met the little boy. I looked at his hands. They were perfectly fine. He was 5 years old. He was very small. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he goes, she told him to play something. And he was playing a major scale. He was playing arpeggios. I said, he can't even stretch to a fifth. I said, just let him grow a little bit. You know, there's a reason why we have different methods for different age groups. So the prep course, basically, we have for the early beginner, we have for beginners, which is the Alfred's Basic Piano Library and the all-in-one course. And then we have a course for later beginners, which is the complete Alfred's Basic Piano Library. And I'll be explaining a little bit more about those. The course for beginners, the Alfred's Basic Piano Library, is the majority of our students. From age 7 to 9 when they start, it moves twice as fast as the prep course, and the prep course twice as low as the Alfred's Basic course. And the later beginners combines more materials so that you can add more materials into the library. Let's look at the approaches just generally on what Alfred's Basic Piano Library is built on. There's 3 very general ways you can approach teaching piano. Middle C position, where that middle C note is the beginning to learn everything fanning out from that. It's right in front of you. It's uses the majority of the staff notes. There's also the intervallic approach, where we're going to be learning the notes of every key on the piano by intervals. And then there's also the multi-key approach, where you're going to gradually learn the keys. And Alfred's Basic was, when it was started and released in 1981, it really was one of the first to make this eclectic mix, where you had some middle C, you had some intervallic approach in it, and multi-key approach. And it's all mixed in there to make sure that the student gets a well-rounded progression to the concepts that they're learning. Let's turn to page 16. With each of these different levels, there are what we call core books. So for the young beginners in the Alfred Prep course, we'll have a lesson, a theory book, a solo book, and a technique book. The lesson book is the everyday book that we will be learning our concepts. And as we introduce theoretical ideas, we can supplement that with a theory book. What's nice about having multiple books is that as they're learning on the piano with the theory book, they're writing the same notes down. They're reinforcing what they're learning in those concepts that are introduced. I'm finding in the teaching now that we'll learn middle C. Let's say we learn a 5-finger pattern starting on C, and the student will kind of know the notes on that. When they go to write down those notes, then they're kind of lost. Or in the other way around, where they identify the notes so easily if they have to write them on the staff, but when you put them on the piano, they're kind of fumbling because it's an added sort of oral or a visual stimulation for them to try to find the same things. So it's the mix of the learning styles of the student that's really going to help in our teaching. There are in the prep course, as I said, it moves slower, and it's also based and geared towards the younger student, 5 to 7, so that visually and the theme of the pieces and whatnot really will appeal to those younger students. Physically, they're not moving as fast until their hands develop into larger hands, so we won't be playing octaves too early, but it's moving at a sort of a half pace to the regular course. Let's look at the second column here with Alfred's Basic. This is the majority of students will be in Alfred's Basic Piano Library. The core books here are lesson theory, recital, and technique. And the technique books are really an addition to the core books, where it gives us an opportunity to drill with the students, that they can really, as they're learning fourths and fifths and sixths, that they have exercises that allow them to really focus on what that new concept is. We don't always expect for our students to have a whole pile of books, because that's not reasonable. But as we see our students, some have a harder time with certain things. And if we know that there's something out there that can supplement that, but it fits in with what we're learning in the course, it becomes very, very helpful as teachers. Let's look at page 17, the basic all-in-one course. This one has combined lesson theory and recital, and a few things from what we call fun books. These are spread out a little bit differently than the basic course, and I'll go into the chart at the bottom of the page here in a second. But these allow us to have some theory, to have some technique, some recital pieces, as well as the lesson book. So if you want to and you like to assign outside supplementary books, it allows the student not to have so many books to work with. It's sort of combined in for the student to work with. And then lastly, we have what we call the complete course. This is the easiest. It's basically taking the regular course and combining the first 4 books into 2 books each. So 1A and 1B is complete 1, and levels 2 and 3 are complete 2, 3. That's basically, that also allows you to supplement more with books of your choice, because there's only 1 book for each of them. How these, I think when Morty was really thinking through the method as it developed, he wanted it interchangeable. So if you have a student that you started out, and let's say they're a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and they're really progressing fast through the prep course, you can make jumps into the regular course, which would allow them to move faster. This little chart on the bottom, if you just consider the first line of squares here, are the prep course, and for every 2 books, it goes into 1 book of the regular course. The all-in-one course, you can see that there's 5 levels. Those will eventually dump into level 3 of the Alfred's Basic Piano Library. So if you perhaps started a student in the regular course and they're really, really struggling, and they're young enough, you can have them go backwards and go into the prep course. And it's twice as long, twice as much reinforcement for that student. And then the complete courses are very much just combined books for the older student so that they can progress faster. Let's turn to page 18. Yes? That's teach yourself to play piano. We have an adult method that I have some samples in the back of this. That is very similar to the teach yourself book.
I've been taking lessons here from Sandy. In fact, I have class tonight. We've been referring to this book in parts.
It's using the same concepts and the same theory sequencing as Alfred's Basic would. With the prep course, since we have the regulars piano library, I think I'm going to kind of just zoom through the prep course here. The same things will be addressed. It has a different look. It has different music in it, some similar music, slower for the kids, more reinforcement. If you look at the lesson books, we'll go from level to level. They'll be learning middle C position for a short time, a C position. They'll be learning in the keys of C and G, and then they will move into the regular course. On page 19, theory books, yes?
Before we start the prep course, I'm very familiar with this.
Okay.
A lot of Alfred. How would you know what student would be different to start the beginner or to start the all-in-one? Because you're just meeting the students and you're starting from the beginning, but
Yes.
you don't want to throw him into prep because he's a little bit older.
Okay.
How do you know the difference between those two?
I think it would be just in the interview, and from what they would understand and kind of seeing their comprehension level when you're meeting the student. If they're a straight A student, if they've had previous piano lessons or musical knowledge, that they would be able to go faster. If you feel that it would behoove you to have all the books combined, the theory and the technique and the lesson book all together in the course, then you would go in that direction. If you feel that the student in their interview, they really don't know anything about the music, they're a fresh beginner, and you're not quite sure, you could start them in the regular course, and then they may need the more direct emphasis from theory to supplement it, so that it would be more and less fast-paced, yes. The theory books also go along with the prep course, but they are very slow progressing so that the student really has time. They're age appropriate to have the student really understand the concepts as they're moving along. Page 20, the solo books. These are like the recital books for the regular course, but they're once again geared towards the young player. And then page 21, activity and ear training books. In order to grab those aural learner students, we want to give them ear training opportunities. Can they hear this chord? Can they hear the direction of a melody as it's going up? Can they hear the rhythm? Can they clap back the rhythm? Those types of aural development for some students would be very easy, for other students would be challenging. So we want to have that available. And you can find out when you're teaching out of the lesson book if a student's really not hearing the rhythm, that they should be clapping back to you or clapping along with you in the lesson, that they would want more reinforcement in the ear training. Okay, let's look on page 22. By going through Alfred's basic piano library, I think that the regular course, I think you're going to understand the concepts that would go into the prep course, the all-in-one course, and even the adult course as we're going through it. Let's pull out the orange book just real quickly here. And I just want to go through just some kind of concepts. Every once in a while, I'll run into a teacher that says, if I see pre-reading, I like to skip all that and just start right on the staff. And I think that there's just a small thing that a small thing that grows later that you're missing. Because I feel before a student's really reading on the staff, there's a number of things that we want to achieve. One of them is them hearing the pulse. Can they count 4 notes in a measure, even if they don't know the time signature? We want to make sure that we are having them feel that pulse, because as they progress, if they haven't really gotten it into their system to hear that pulse, there's going to be rhythmic problems that develop as they progress. Just turn to page 8, and let's say we're looking at just very simply the 2 black key notes. What I want to achieve in introducing the student to the staff is, first of all, how they're sitting. Are they sitting upright? We don't get that many chances to correct bad posture. So if they start and they're always very aware when the lesson is fairly easy at the beginning, we are able to work on the physical to start that progression there. And we want to, the shape of their hand, we want to make sure that they're not going to play it flat. How those notes sound to them. There's a couple of tricks that I like to help, and I use it as they progress. One is if you just lay your hand flat here. You pretend you tie a little string here, and you pull it up till the fingers are even. That's the hand shape we want. A lot of times we'll introduce hand shape by the ball grip, and I notice this, for some students that means a claw or gripping tightly, but if it's just this and you pull up. And if we want to use the puppet analogy again, as I'm sitting here and slouching like I do in the office, and I'm sitting here slouching and I think I have a little string here that just comfortably lifts you up. Just pull that string. And it's a very gentle visual way of the student straightening their hands. As far as curving, besides the flat. We want to get away from the flat note. We'll pull up our hand, and sometimes it's over onto the nail, and it's like, no, it's not that, it's on the balls of the fingertips. I tend to see if they can visualize, in like first grade, you have a little dot, paint, the brightly colored primary colors. If I think I'm putting a dot on each of the fingertips, and I want to do a perfect circle as they go down, you're going to do it on the pad. You wouldn't think of dipping your fingernail into there. You would think of just doing a nice round pad. So if you do that, they get a visual of, oh, okay, I'm doing those nice round paint circles as we're starting, so that they identify with the pad on the keys. Let's turn to page 10. There's different ways that we can introduce the student to counting. And I think that is very useful at the very beginning with numerical. What's the note value? What's the rhythmic value of that note? 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. As we introduce the time signature, we will of course do metrical counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what's the advantage for numerical? When you move on into more sophisticated music and you have, say, cross rhythms, you have syncopations, you can go back and be going 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2, and 3, and 4. And you can add, have them really counting out the note values that are in that syncopation that aren't metrical, but that would be numerical, so that they're going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. It's something that can be used later on. But for the student, we want them to make sure they see a half note, they're going to count the two beats. They see a whole note, they're going to count those beats. One challenge that we find in our beginners is if they don't concentrate on counting and you let them off the hook, or they're counting in their head, that later on it comes to haunt them because they're really not seeing what the rhythmic values are. Yes? It's Gerou, like Jerusalem. Let's look at look at page 35 with the legato playing. Page 35 in the lesson book. Until the slur's introduced, we're just focusing on, like the page before. But when we introduce the slur, we want to think how we're going to shape that slur. We're going to do it really an unconscious crescendo and a diminuendo. So we want to achieve that shape, so it's kind of going in and coming out. Now, if we physically need to reproduce that, how do you explain that to the young student? Well, we're adding weight to the hand. So as the student starts, we're going to drop into the key, and I'm going to feel like I'm just putting a little more pressure on it and then releasing the pressure at the end of the phrase. It's in a way sinking into the keys a little bit more than when they started the phrase, when they end the phrase. Let's look at, we're going to kind of revisit this without directly looking at it, about the intervals. In introducing the intervals, the seconds, very easy, notes next to each other. The thirds, you're skipping the note. Oftentimes, I have the student play when we're hands together on the fall board of the piano. So if we're looking at Rock Song on page 41, I'm going to 1, rest, 3, rest, 1, dun. So I get the feeling of the shape of that interval. So when they're playing on the piano, we're adding this aural stimulation as well. So they've already done the physical shape of it. Let's look ahead here at page 49 with the donkey. We're adding to the melody very simple intervals in the left hand. As we progress through the first levels of Alfred's basic, we're introducing seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths. And we want to be able to be very comfortable with how the student's going to approach the piece. As soon as I start playing hands together, I chop up the piece for the student. I don't have them start learning with measure one. I start where there might be some challenges. Let's look at the third system here. All right, maybe the third from the last note. All right. Have them play it again. It's the most activity in this piece. Then I will have them go through and look at what are the intervals in the left hand. We have a second, we have a third, then we have a fourth, and we have a fifth. If we challenge the most activity in a piece first, the challenges first, when they do the easier parts, it's much more comfortable, especially as a piece progresses and they're performing it, they're memorizing it. They've learned those challenging parts and they are not the source of stress anymore. It's all been taken care of ahead of time. It's what they've practiced the most. So as we progress through the course, we will be teaching the students how to practice and how to learn a piece. I'm going to go back to the sample and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. Page 59, let's just talk about staccatos. Oftentimes staccatos and legatos are introduced together because they're extreme polars, right? And I like the idea of a staccato not just being detached. That's to say, it's kind of hard for a student to visualize what that would mean. But if we think of them as flicking with the fingers a little bit. Physically, you can't play it long because the hand is just doing a gentle little flicker. It keeps the stress out. If you're thinking of doing the staccatos, bounce up, 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 we have this stress developing here. If we think of just flicking it. Now, as the music gets faster, we have to think of more sophisticated ways of playing those staccato notes. But certainly for the beginner, we want to be able to play those nice detached notes, but in a flickered manner. Like opposite-wise, with legato, when we think they're right next to each other, without lifting the fingers, and we all teach that. Anytime you're going to have legato playing, you're going to more than likely have the phrase shaping at the same time. So if you're really conscious of what the direction of that phrase is, where you're applying more weight towards the middle of what they're playing and releasing it. It's all about this perceived hand weight as they progress through the course. Let's, this is yours to keep, but let's go back to our sampler. And I'm just going to zoom through various ideas from Alfred's Basic. And what we're going to do towards the end is I'm going to compare it to some popular music and how the popular music's illustrating the same concepts throughout the levels as the lesson books would. Let's turn back to page 22. Now, there's some tricks when the student's first learning our notes, and they know A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Those are the notes that we're going to be using. And so you can play certain games. You can go, I can say A, and if I want you to answer always the step up. A, C, E, G. By thirds, A. B, C. It's a way to start thinking of the notes and the intervals at the same time, and there's little tricks. One thing in teaching, and especially for the youngsters, as they come in, what you don't want, and I remember feeling this when I was very young, is what you don't want is, ooh, I didn't practice as well, or I'm kind of afraid I'm not going to play it well for you today. I like to start off each lesson completely different than the last time the lesson was doing. If I have flashcards, and we're working on the notes and just reminding the student of the notes, I may in the studio just kind of put the primary notes that they're working on just kind of around the studio, then I'll time them. Okay, in a minute, how many flashcards can you get? Okay, find all the C's, and then they're looking around. Find all the D's, find all the E's. Or I will lie all the flashcards out here, not in order, and I'll say put them in scale order. Put them in A through G, yes.
So Tom, you're introducing reading and hand position and different concepts. Let's just assume that 5 people are walking in your class and they've never seen piano before, and their parents made them come and they want to learn piano. Where do you start? Do you start with the beat? Do you start with the black and whites? Do you start with pitch? Do you start with...
The easiest thing to start with is the black and white, which in most methods is why you see what I call floaty notes, the pre-reading notes that's not on the staff and whatnot. And that is simply to get the student to be able to be comfortable around the piano. Oftentimes you're moving up. And why the black keys? They're the easiest to identify. So they get the sense of motion. You get to fix their body. They get, you can look at their hand position and explain it. I think if you don't start in reinforcing that hand position from the first time they touch the piano, you're always going to have that as a challenge. And they're not worrying about reading vertically. They're not worrying about phrase shape or pedaling or anything at that point. So that's the time when you're really working on the physical to get them started properly. And you just gently keep reminding them, keep all the tricks. Going back to the note reading, one of the challenges always in reading music is how do you, outside of the kids who are natural readers, how do you keep them from falling into patterns? You know, if they're playing something in C major, oh, I know that's a 5, I know that's a 1, you know, it's a 5-finger pattern. So how do you challenge them out of that? Nowadays with apps, there's so many cheap apps that you can do. They're playing games, and I find that the students that cannot find middle C week after week, you give them the app, and bam, 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 they know those notes because there's something's charging here. Or when they're writing in their note speller books, much easier for them to identify the notes or to figure out ways for themselves on how to find that note real quickly. You can see them devising how middle D is a step up from middle C. So all these kind of different approaches really reinforce it. I don't think it's a matter of just sitting at the lesson and playing those notes and hoping that the student retains them independent of finger numbers or a position that they're in as they're playing. Let's look here. Let me get things that I can read, and we'll kind of zoom through. I want you, some of you don't know Alfred's Basic Piano Library, so I'm going to play a few things that are in there so you can get the sound. Let's turn to page 18 in the sampler and just talk about the intervals in the top right-hand corner. In the second measure, before I would teach this piece, this is from the prep course, but it relates to all of them. Before I teach the piece, I look for sort of the construction of the piece. So the student really doesn't feel like they're starting at the beginning and going to the end. But I'm going to start with every time the hands are together on the starting note. So the second measure, the fourth measure, the sixth measure, and the eighth measure. And then I'll have them play just those. And then one of the challenges will be letting go of both hands. So I want them to be prepared in doing that so when they're adding everything to it, they're not letting go of that right hand too early because they've always already practiced those little slices of that piece. Let's look at when you grow up. And this is on the bottom. No, let's jump ahead. Let's go back to Alfred's basics. So let's jump ahead to page 22. And there's a piece called Windmill. The concept that's being learned here is ritardando. It's something that for a lot of students is difficult to, how do you get it to slow down? But it's something that as they become more musically attuned, it falls in line for them. But here, what I want to do is just the first beat of each of the measure. And then I will go back and fill it in. Almost every piece that, when the student's in playing hands together, I will introduce the piece by letting them sight read one hand, perhaps the right hand, and I play the left hand, then they play the left hand, I play the right hand. They get a sense of what the sound, the piece sounds like. They also know where the rhythmic challenges are going to be, because where they stumble there is where they're going to learn it incorrectly at home. And then it's almost impossible to constantly change those errors, correct those errors. So if we can play the piece, give them the sense of what everything is about that piece that they're going to be practicing at home, it makes it much easier for our lessons as we progress. Let's look at page 22, the bottom right, a piece called Lavender Blue. Here we're just learning sixths. This is in this lesson 2. And I always block out. It's going to be our challenge. So here's the first measure, the second measure. We're just moving up the finger to the third and the fourth measure. Everything before they play the piece is blocked out, understood before you send them home. If you say, okay, why don't you start with the next piece on page 10, and that'll be the lesson. If it's not introduced and shown to them, played through, really systematically looked at to where the challenges are so that they understand what they're doing, you're going to be correcting mistakes. Yes?
My challenge is with 3/4 time. They want to make it 4/4 time. So instead of going
They want to add that extra beat. Can you show them the waltz? 1, 2, 3, 1. Sometimes just the physical. Let's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, so they can get the sound in their head of that pulse. Another way, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Because they're hearing everything in 4/4, for a while, that is a switch. That's one of the classic stumbling blocks. Another one, reading to the next line, isn't it? They stop, or to the top of the page, they stop. And so as teachers, what we want to do is when they're reaching those milestones, those small milestones, what we want to do is address those before they really go into the piece. So if I have their first 2-page piece, what we'll do is we'll play the bottom of and going to the top. Or if they're starting to read in 3 systems, we'll do a little exercise before they learn the piece. And I won't say why, but we'll just play something that goes through it. And in a way that's perhaps they're playing the left hand if it's easier, so that it never really occurs to them that it doesn't stop as they're going through that. There's universal stumbling blocks that teachers know that I think if we address them without even letting them know why we're addressing it, it kind of avoids that. But that is one of them. It's also when you get to triplets and you get to 16ths, you get to dotted quarter 16th, it becomes a triplet, or vice versa. And so we want to always reinforce what one is from the other. So we're going to learn triplets, and we're going to learn 6/8 time, 3/8 time, before we learn 16ths, so that we can really hear that difference between 4/16ths and a dotted quarter 16th and a triplet, quarter note 8th. Let's look at page 23. This is in level 3 of the lesson book. What I would do to approach this is start with the third measure. It's going to be kind of the odd one. It goes from C major to C minor. The whole piece, very cleverly, is about make up your mind between major and minor. So I would introduce them to the minor first. Then I would introduce them to the fourth system down, the A minor. Then the major. If we take out all these little snippets, not in the direction of the piece, but we teach them in little pieces, then it takes away the priority from how we start a piece. And all those little kind of hiccups that we may have later have been dealt with first. So they're actually the easier things than the easy things that we would if we had started. So in this piece, we're going C major, C minor, A major, throughout D minor, just with the play of going from major to minor. And then it goes to the minor here, second ending. And so on there. One thing too, from the very beginners, when you were saying how you introduce things, is to not let the fingers be flying around. And that's like, it's a no-brainer to say that. But really, as you progress through the music, it's interesting how a pianist can make work more difficult for themselves if they don't have that connection with the typography of the keyboard. We want to make sure our hands stay connected to where we're playing. There's no reason, unless it's a huge sforzando or something where we're using all our body weight or arm weight, there's no reason for the fingers to have to not have that contact with the keyboard. Even in staccato, if we're creating that detached note, the fingers don't need to be flying away or moving side to side, but always staying so that we can feel the connection. Sometimes after a student's kind of got something down, I will ask them to just close their eyes and play it. And then I'll say, now, can you play? Now go up a fifth. They have to feel it. Whatever the example is, so that they really can be feeling and visualizing where that keyboard works. It's going to come in handy when we're doing a lot of moving around the piano. Let's look at the theory books. Sometimes it's not super apparent as to why we're doing an example in a theory book. It's, oh, we're writing out the C major scale, like in the top right-hand corner of page 24, where we're going to write out the C position in the left hands and the right hand. Down on the bottom, left-hand side in level 1B, we have a little exercise only using the black keys. And part of this I find very handy. Pentatonic melody. I find it handy because we get afraid when we're playing in C major and we're playing in a G position, and then all of a sudden we're learning G major and the chords, and all of a sudden we're learning chromatic notes, and all of a sudden that A to A sharp becomes an A to a C sharp, becomes an A to a F sharp, because they're sort of nervous about going on the black keys. And so we want to feel that it's all very comfortable, but we don't play on the black keys once we're on the staff for a while until sharps and flats are introduced. But even then, it's not, there's sort of a forbidden land in doing that. So it's nice when you can find something that allows them to play on the black keys. Let's look at the recital books. In Alfred's Basic, besides the lesson and the theory books, we have recital books. And they offer challenges. They're all original music that goes along with it, but they're very coordinated to the lesson book as it goes. Now, let's say you have a student that is doing fine, basically, but maybe it becomes a little bit much for them to use the recital books. There's a lot of supplemental material that can go along with that. One of the traditional ones is something called a fun book. The pieces are a little bit easier. They're correlated as well, but they're like the recital book, except a little bit easier pieces. And we'll be looking at some of those here. Let's look at the bottom of page 26. As soon as I find my... If we have the freight train, here we're really going to work on being very comfortable with speeding up and slowing down. But here it's a colorful picture. We're thinking of that train starting slowly and ending slowly in the distance, fading out. Well, I didn't start slow, did I? I just jumped on the train and kept going. And then it ends and it fades out into the distance. If we look at the toccata staccato, here I'm thinking flick. We're not using the comparison between legato and staccato here. Everything's staccato. So we can really focus on keeping all those fingers evenly. And once again, without a motion other than up and down, I think you're going to be building tension in the hand as it moves. But if you're thinking of just getting off the key, it offers the suggestion of the detachment. Let's look at the Spanish dance on page 27. And here we're going to use our body. We're going to use our arm weight because we have a triad that is going to be accented at the downbeat of each of these measures, but then the right hand is going to be light. In the contrast, if I just want my hand to create the accent, you're offering tension into the student's body. So if I'm thinking of the weight, and with the slurs, once again, sinking into those slurs so that it has the shape, as just gently sinking with the weight into it and out of it. Let's look at the technique books. Now, the technique books are not going to go into detail of the physicality of how do you play a staccato or anything, but they do offer drills and exercises. So if there's a student that really has a hard time as they're moving into intervals, as they're moving into maybe broken chords, hands together, it's a way of drilling some of those materials for that student to work on. So if we were to look at the bottom of page 28, let me get here. On the right-hand side, just a simple 5-finger pattern. Now, when I'm hearing a student that is really not getting the sense of how to sink into the keys to bring out a nice tone quality, some examples, just based on 5-finger patterns, have them play it very softly, thinking about the evenness, thinking of the notes being very legato together, increasing the weight, Now, how are they increasing the weight? It's not from slamming down the fingers from above. It's from really pushing into the keys as if I'm adding a book every level of dynamic. I'm adding another book color. And listening. A lot of times we'll go through and we're worried about notes and rhythms. Fermata here, a staccato there, and we're not allowing the student to really listen how they play things 2 different ways, 3 different ways, and how that tone quality changes and how we can make that change. And especially on lyrical pieces, it's very advantageous when you can really work on the musicality and bringing out that tone quality. Now you can say, let's do a more lyrical tone quality, but if you don't share to the student that they're using weight, that they're using direction, they're using their ear to create those qualities, then it's meaningless to them as they're progressing through it. Let's look at page 32. Alfred's Basic in the 80s and early 90s, as we were adding supplemental books, was one of the first methods to add an ear training component. And if you enter your students into state competitions, certificate of merit, and such, they need ear training background as well. And I think for the students, the mixture of understanding the theory and the concepts is fine. When you hear it, you have to identify it. You have to clap it back in the proper rhythm. You have to say whether something's the same or different. Or you have to identify a wrong note in a scale. I think it triggers something in the student's mind that applies to their lessons as well. Oh, now I'm hearing this major scale because I heard it wrong, I worked on that. Oh, I'm hearing this chord progression because I had to identify it. It's sort of like always, if you have kids and you're helping with the homework and did you hear that? And it's like, what? You're trying to help them and they're not listening. So if they have to do it, the connection's there for doing that. The note spellers. Sometimes for some students that have a hard time really reading the notes, I will substitute a note speller book for the theory book. Because they're understanding the theory as it's going through. It's, and maybe that's all fine, but what their strength needs to be, or they need to be stronger, is reading and identifying those notes. Once it's in a context, like on page 33, of being in a game where physically you're having to compare the matching note to the note on the staff, or if it's a game that they're filling in a puzzle with, there's a different part of the brain that is activated that allows them to understand it as well. And a lot of times I find that more useful than actually reinforcing the theory as they're going through. Page 34, 35 in the sampler. The fun books, as I mentioned, they are a way of assigning some supplementary things. They're not as challenging as the recital books. And they're meant to be lighter and more silly in nature than the materials that you would be playing in the recital books. Let's look at page 34 and a piece called For Ludwig. And here we have sharps and we have flats in the same piece. And throughout Alfred's Basic, one of the key items that the authors focused on was making sure the lyrics were fun, the subject matter was fun. There was a little kind of clever twist in many of this. If I practice well someday, you'll hear me play Beethoven's music with such ease. If I practice well, someday you'll hear me play that music he wrote for Elise. And so on with that one. Now, if we're looking at, as we're progressing through here, let's look at page 35, the bottom right, a piece called Calypso Rumba. And this is in level 3. Here we're going to do the subdivision of 4/4 time differently. So it's that 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. What I like to work on this one is you see those accents in there. It's going to define the rhythm within that measure, but also we want to notice that it's piano. So an accent is only as loud as is relative to the dynamic that it's in. So we're not going to punch those out so much that we lose the sense of piano, but we're going to keep them within that context. When I'm doing arrangements, and I'm always thinking, I'll have some pop song or something I'm doing, and I'm correlating it, and sometimes I'll think, it's like Star Wars or something, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Where do I put the accents? And then you think for a student, oftentimes it's ba-da-da-da, slam, da-da-da-da, slam, because of those accents mean just punch it. And so we want to make sure that we know that it's just elevating the level of the dynamic above the dynamic we're in. So if you're in fortissimo, the accent's certainly going to be much, much greater. Let's turn to page 36. If you have the opportunity where you have a group of beginners, and let's say it's overflow year, and you could teach maybe a group of 5 or 6 of them at the same time to get started. We have the same concepts, the same theoretical spacing as in Alfred's Basic Piano Library in the group piano course. It's using the same materials, but it's also combining the ear training, some improvisation, some theory, and it's a way for you to work in a group environment with students and still be using the same materials. So let's say you can play catch up with that group of kids before they're individually taught. It's just another kind of variety on Alfred's Basic. Page 38, the complete levels, and once again, 1A, 1B pushed into level 1, or complete 1, complete 2, 3, put into those levels there. Page 40, the all-in-one. The art looks different. Most of the pieces, if not all the pieces, are the same as Alfred's Basic Piano Library. It just now allows the student to actually be interrupted with a theory activity, an extra reinforcement piece from the recital book. So as they're progressing along, it's all contained into that book so that they don't have to carry as many books. The pacing's slightly different, so you would end up in that chart going to into the, well, I can tell you exactly, into, if you completed the all-in-one, into level 4. So it's going to get you through those complete levels and into level 4. Let's look at page 44. Now it's going to get a little bit easier, and we're going to take a break. But before I take a break, I'll play a few pieces here. I'm going to go into more detail about the concepts, but more directly into some new books that we've worked on. And so it'll be a little more interesting for playing through them. Yes?
So you mentioned black keys. Do you have any books, or do you ever recommend in a group situation of perhaps starting with black keys?
Well, the pre-reading does start with the black keys, but it doesn't stay in it because once you go on the staff, it's an added complication with the accidentals. And if you're introducing concepts in what you feel are the most understandable and fundamental for a student, adding the accidentals kind of comes early on, but it's more complicated to play in D flat major than it is in C major, which is the white keys.
And you mentioned the difficulty of the student playing octaves. Do you ever show your books by showing the hands, 2 hands playing the octave?
No, students often play octaves at elementary levels, at beginning levels, by alternating the hands. When I was talking about octaves, I was talking about the physical hand.
Do you teach them, like, do you have any books teaching 2 hands, 1 finger at a time or anything like that?
Yes. You'll see in some of the earlier music I'm going to play right after we grab a donut. Some examples how I work around the physical limitations of their growth and their hand size as they're going through. I'm going to just our sort of little break here is I'm going to play a piece on the bottom of page 44 on the bottom right-hand side. We did a series of praise hits where we took contemporary praise music and leveled them to Alfred's basic piano library. One of the challenges that any arranger has when you're correlating, and I do a lot of it, is most melodies are not in a 5-finger position. If you are somewhere around C position when you're arranging it, you have that variety of a larger span. And so you can pretty much fit in the melodies. When you start going into actual 5-finger patterns, it's harder to find the melodies without that 6th, without that 7th available in the melody. I found in doing these praise, I didn't know a lot of the praise pieces, but I thought, well, this is sort of like Christian rock music, and the melodies were so pretty that it was very, very easy to fit them into the leveling. I'm going to just play a piece called The Stand, and then we'll take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll zoom through a bunch of material that I think you could use. The Stand, the sole purpose of this was to find a piece where I could have parallel sixths, which is something that we're learning in level 2. Where we have the sixth in parallel motion. And it worked really well. And oddly enough, I couldn't find a source to figure out what the chords were in this piece. So I watched a YouTube thing, and it was sort of like a lot of distorted guitar, and it was a real pretty piece and everything. But it was sort of that thing, and this slow piece. I went, this is perfect for kids playing moving sixths. I'll move on. It's very little sweet melodies that can go into the method, and that is one of the things that I see increasing. And I have a son studying piano, and teaching the students and hearing other teachers is losing the attention for piano, and so we try to get the interest by adding on more contemporary things, more current things that are using the same concepts and whatnot. And we're going to look at some popular hits after that. I'll line them up to the concepts. I'll talk about some of the issues. And we'll just take a quick break here and come back.
I want to stand between you but I'd like to, thank you, Tom. I'd like to welcome all of you to our concert hall at Community Music Center. I'm Mary Ann Grossman, the development director, and this school is almost 100 years old. We're not in our 97th year. It was founded in 1921 by a woman who came from New York, a musician, a violinist, and a nurse, Gertrude Field, who was part of the neighborhood community settlement movement. This was the Dolores Street School for Girls, or Center for Girls. So our mission is pretty simple. It's remained unchanged for 97 years. We provide quality music education for all, regardless of means. This year alone, we have given over $2 million in scholarships and tuition assistance. We offer private lessons. We have 115 faculty on our staff, teaching artists actually, and we offer performance instruction in 30 different instruments, including vocal. We provide theory classes as well. As a lifelong piano student, I study here, as most of our staff does. I relate to what Tom said just now about keeping interest and keeping students engaged and involved. Piano happens to be our largest group, our most popular instrument to study here. We are looking always for piano teachers to join our staff, so if you have any interest, we have an announcement on our website, which is sfcmc.org, about and jobs, or you can stop by our registrar's office while you're here today and just ask about applying for that. Also, I just wanted to mention that we offer free concerts or low-cost concerts in this 140-seat concert hall almost every evening. I mean, we're pretty solidly booked. It can be rented for your own student recitals for a really modest fee, and most of our concerts and recitals are free to the public or at very low cost. And coming up is Taiwanese pianist tomorrow night, Chu Yu Chen. He's performing an all Beethoven recital. So come, bring your friends, and check out our website, because we have a really full calendar of events, and we'd love to have you join us. So thank you, and thanks Ben and JC and Tom for letting me give CMC a little bit of a plug, and enjoy the workshop.
And Kevin, you're going to join me, right? I'll give you the padded bench. Why don't you pull out the packet of books, the popular hits, and we'll look at those, and we'll get a better sense of how the student's progressing in the first 4 levels of Alfred's Basic. But I'm going to use the popular hits as the examples. So you can pull out the single books. We'll let everyone get settled here. Okay, in Alfred's Basic Piano Library, I should have had to pull this out first. There's a little flyer that you have that's Xeroxed that has the list of books here. If you're curious on any of these levels that I'm playing, as I mentioned before, I've listed every concept that the student is working on for that level. So if you go, oh, what key are they playing in, and what are they working on? They're listed there. But on the first page of it, I'd like you to look at the bottom and see all the supplemental books that go along with Alfred's Basic Piano Library. There's classic themes, composition, duet books, ear training, ensemble, etc. I'd like to point out the ones that I think you find most useful in certain circumstances. You'll notice that there's a classics theme book in the first column, and in the Third column, there's a repertoire book, and you wonder what the difference is. The repertoire books are standard repertoire. The classic themes are easier arrangements of themes from standard repertoire. So the repertoire books are actually the real classics. So that would be a difference there. I would recommend keeping in mind that there's the ear training books, because they do come in very handy for the students and the musicianship of the students. In the second column, the note speller books, very, very helpful in sending the students home with a book that they can write out all the activities and the challenges in the note speller book. And you don't have to spend your lesson time, but it's reinforcing the identification of those notes. In the second column, there is second from the last, popular hits, and that's a series I'm going to look at right now. Right now we're from 1A to level 5. These are very similar in concept to those top hits in the third column. The top hits were done maybe 15, 20 years ago, and at the time, like Titanic, and certain songs were very big back then. We thought we would update it with a lot of songs that the students would know. You might not necessarily always recognize them, but if they watch the Disney Channel and things like that, they know what those songs are, or certain current movies. I throw in, as I mentioned before, I throw in familiar, some real classic kind of melodies that I think are fun that weren't in the other top hits books. So this is the updated version for pop music. All right. Have you studied your floating notes?
Not recently.
Okay,
But I'm good to
this
go.
Minecraft on page 2, pull out the orange book, the level 1A. There's certain, in the pre-reading, I went ahead and put a few pop songs in there because it worked really well for having the students. Oddly enough, every 3rd, 4th, and 5th grader loves playing Minecraft. And where they're building just houses and all these things, this constant building. And it's like a big obsession with those kids. And so I thought, well, let me look up some themes from Minecraft, because music goes throughout the whole thing. No one's talking. It's a goalless end. So I went through the music, and it's real kind of in the background and whatnot, but it made a real good piece for the students to start off with. Oddly enough, the Minecraft in 1A and the Minecraft selection in 1B are the kids' favorite pieces. I doubt they've ever heard them. The melodies, it's just because it's Minecraft. And that's the piece that they're all hankering to play. It's all in the black keys. The student in the lesson book, you're going to be an octave higher. Okay. The student in the lesson book is really playing in stepwise motion with the black keys, but here they have to kind of mix it up a little bit. 1, 2, ready, go. Very nice. Now, the next page, this one is an old song from the 60s, but it is in the end credits of any Iron Man movie that the kids might have seen. We will probably recognize this from years and years ago. It works real well for the pre-reading notation and gives the student the chance to play something that really sounds superhero. 1, 2, ready, one. Here, I counted off wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ready, go. Let's look at page 6. This one I dug up. I hear this here and there and everything, and I've always thought it was such a funny song, the Jeepers Creepers. Where'd you get those peepers? I think it's from the 20s or something. But I thought that the students would get a kick out of what the piece is. A lot of pop songs are not in stepwise motion. So it is a really nice example as they're reading on the staff in level 1A. They'll have an opportunity to play with this. 1, 2, ready, go. It's just allowing the students to have that hand-to-hand motion as they're going through it. Page 8, Wreck-It Ralph, the theme from Wreck-It Ralph. Very big movie with the kids. We're introducing just simply a quarter rest into the course here, and very, very little intervallic play, which is on page 9 at the end of that. We'll skip that one. Well, let's play that. Wreck-It, Wreck-It, Ralph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ready, go. On page 10 in the lesson books, page 45, hold on. This is a very popular pop song that you really couldn't escape. In the lesson book, the student's simply playing a piece called 4th of July, where they've just learned fourths. So we're going to switch it a little bit and have, I wish that I could. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ready, go. And once we're also reinforcing fourths in that melody. When we, page 12, when we move on to slurs. And here, I want to apply more weight on the hand in the middle of that phrase as we're going through. So that gives some shape. Instead of where they're just counting, we're moving ahead. Everything in music is about motion, whether it's the small little phrases, whether it's perhaps two-system phrase, whether it's a whole section, or whether it's an entire piece. There's always a point where we're going to, and we always want to keep that in mind, that that point needs to be reached as the most interesting part. So in this case, we just want to give a little more weight to those phrases. Oftentimes we say, we want to play the notes to the full value, and it's legato, it's smooth, but we don't really always let them know how you make that smoothness, that the fingers are barely letting go before you play the second note, but it's also in the sequence of that phrase, you want the weight, you want a little more pushing into the keyboard as you're going through. Bum, bum, ba-dum. Let's jump to 16. In Alfred's Basic at the 1A, there's a lot of opportunity to play in 3/4 time. And in pop music itself, or the maybe movie themes or Broadway themes, a lot of times there's not 3/4. A lot of 6/8, but not 3/4 necessarily. Here we're going to add that tuplet pulse to something that they know. The theme of the theme from Superman. Bum 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 bum. 1, 2, 3, ready, go. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. There you go. Okay, we'll have a lesson after. And then page 18, we've learned staccatos. So I put them in a piece called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It revived on Broadway, and we don't know what's on Broadway half the time out here. But it's still a cute little song and very catchy lyrics from the 60s. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ready, go. Yeah, so you're an octave higher, and that's 2 octaves higher. Okay, here you're going to start here, and then you're going to have that 2 octaves higher, okay? Yeah. 1, 2, ready, go. I think you're up there, actually. Well, we'll move on. This happens. Do you want to build a snowman? This one they do know. And here it's the longest piece in the level 1A. And it combines everything that they would be having except for the staccatos, unless I'm not mistaken. Do you want... You start. Let's look at 1B. In level 1B of Alfred's Basic, we're learning to read in the key of C and the key of G. In lesson 1A, we actually play in 7 different keys, but we don't identify them as keys that we're playing in. In level 1B, we're really focusing on the C position, the G position, the key of C, the key of G. I did in the arrangements, even though the student learns pedaling in the lesson book, I left that out of the student part because I wanted the accompaniments to sound full for the student. Do you want to play the accompaniments this time? It'll be more fun. Everything is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ready, go. That's fine. Okay, well, what I'll do, I'll let you off the hook. Let's turn to page 8. And there's a piece called Everything is Awesome. And here we're just learning the da capo al fine with the student's part. But what I did very carefully here is to make sure that the intervals, the hands together playing, is not going to be too much of a challenge for the student. So I make sure that it's sort of a question and answer in the student part. And it goes back to the beginning. What I want to do in any of these arrangements is not be accompaniment dependent. I want to make sure that when the student goes home to play it, that it sounds like it should be played by itself as well for what they know. Here they know fourths, they know thirds, and they know seconds. And they don't need the accompaniment. So when you add the accompaniment to the piece, that it makes it much more enrichment and performance savvy performance for them. But they've learned everything that they need to know in order to play this, play these pieces. Page 12. Besides being in middle C position at the earlier levels in 1A, we're branching out. We're in C position a lot, and then we move to G position. And what we have is a G above middle C, and sometimes the G below middle C as the basis. They're just an octave apart. But then some pieces separate them so that we can start learning those lower notes on the staff, so that it isn't all centered around C, but we start expanding out. Mamma Mia, which I don't think will ever go away, is a really good example for staying in the position, and it gives me a chance to have alternate hands. A lot of times, one of the most pleasurable and fun things for a student is you either give them a sheet solo or they're working on a piece where they're alternating the hands. Now, for some other students, they don't like the alternating hands as much. So this is an opportunity where they do get to work together to make the piece really sound nice. And then it goes back to that. Page 14. This is a student favorite, this cantina band from the very first Star Wars. We're in the bar and they're playing that kind of jazz thing. I've done it in a way that we're incorporating half-step motion. So in the second measure here, we have a D and a C sharp. The thing about introducing sharps and flats to the students is I want to make sure that they really feel the physical closeness of those half steps. So when they're going from a white key to a black key, make sure that you keep on mentioning it's really close and just, play the next note, because a lot of times when you're playing along, they'll kind of start guessing which black key they're supposed to play, even though it's the one right next to it. And also when you start progressing on and you have a lot of kind of color motion in music, you want to be able to always have that comfort of keeping close to the keyboard and it's right next to each other, even though it may be an accent note or a passing tone. Also staccatos in here, and I think of this as just that little gentle flick so that it's detached. It's just almost like a little rub on the keyboard. moves around and a little challenging. Then we have some flats and sharps in there. Let's jump ahead to page 18. In level 1B, there's a piece here, and as soon as I find it here, that is all about playing in half steps. And it's called the whirlwind. So we just simply have this chromatic. Well, it's getting louder and softer. And the perfect fit to this was that old television Batman theme, which really is using the same exact notes, but it's giving the kids a chance to play sort of a cool song, even though it's been since like the 60s for this one. Now what I did here, in keeping really understanding you can't keep that motion going for so long, so I put an eighth rest, something that they've just learned as well, at the end of the first system and each of those, so that they get a chance to break that constant motion. I make sure that the hands switch. I make sure we change kind of into a different position to be able to play through the song, but they're still playing ultimately the effect. With the accompaniment on that one, it's very, very enjoyable. A more recent song on the next page, on page 20, all about that bass, and I made sure it was all about that bass. The point of this piece is dropping it an octave when you repeat it, very easy. What the students learned is a natural sign. So you'll notice it goes D flat to D natural and then to B. I could have done a C sharp instead of the D flat, but when you look at a C sharp going to a B flat, it's an odd, it's an odd interval for a student to recognize. So it's better to keep it on the Ds. But it's very simple. If you were to play the accompaniment, it's just like the song. So that the student actually plays a hit, but there's very little for them to have to learn on it. But they do get to reinforce what they're working on. Let's pull out the Brown book, which is level 2. Here we're getting a little fuller in the pieces. If you turn to page 2, I put in the Raiders March, the Indiana Jones. We had just learned a piece called Kumbaya in Alfred's Basic, which allowed the student to shift between 2/4 and 4/4. And so I kind of played with this song. If you'll notice at the bottom of the first page, the last measure, it's in 2/4. It's sort of, you can end this piece with that 2/4 measure. The other 2/4 measure at the top of page 3 picks it up. So it's really, I've split, in order to have the DC Alfine, I've split that measure in half. But it's something that the student has learned, and keep track here of doing these. Okay. So we have Kumbaya in Alfred's Basic. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So to keep the students' attention, why not have them play one of their movie themes that they will always hear throughout their life? continues on and then goes back. What they've just learned is a dotted quarter note, eighth note pattern, and it's used in this piece very effectively throughout that. Let's turn to page 4. In Alfred's Basic, we're learning this pattern before we're playing a lot of block triads. Sort of avoiding playing all 3 notes together. So I paired it with The Best Day of My Life, which is really after we've introduced 6th into the course, and this has a way for them to play a very familiar piece. Intervals in the left hand. And it goes on with that. Let's, concerning the can-can, when we're up doing that, turn the page to page 6. Over the Rainbow, instead of doing the version that the kids are really not as familiar, for my little boy, I had to drag him to the living room once to watch the old version because the Green Witch was so scary. But then there's other movies where they've used the ukulele from the Hawaiian singer Is. And his ukulele version I thought would be much more appealing to the kids of today. So that's what I'm using here. We've just learned this rhythm. And it has that different feel. It still has the ukulele, but it's something that the kids can completely play. I won't go on. But you'll notice when I reach here, I allow it in a way to end the piece. But if we're going to play the second half, it sounds fine to go along with it. It's a way of getting to sound final, even though it isn't. Page 10, You've Got a Friend in Me. This is from Toy Story. The kids will know this definitely. And we've just learned primary chords in G major. I make sure that throughout here, throughout these popular arrangements, you'll find triads here sometimes and intervals there, sometimes in the same piece. Part of that is the students haven't learned all those triads. So it's very careful that they've recognized everything that they're playing. So I have to make the arrangement work in a way that allows them to play everything because they've done it, but it still works musically. And they just learned fermatas in parallel sixths. A lot of times when we're working in a lesson book, the students tend, because all the material is very homogeneous and it stays really addressing the same issues but just adding on more concepts and more challenges very slowly, a lot of times the kids are guessing at the notes. So if you are assigning a piece, a new piece, and especially a supplementary piece that isn't going to fit in exactly the way the method works, they know sharps and flats, they know sixths, they know the triads in here, but not out of the context of a very comfortable area or a position that they're working in. What I tend to do is I'll have them, wherever there's a finger number, they need to name the note. So at the start of a measure, if you're looking at measure 16, left hand, what is that note? And so instead of kind of relying on where they are at the piano and guessing what the note is, they'll start having to recognize the note and figuring out how they can relate it to something that they know, whether it's the landmark notes, the notes that they've used the most. So throughout, anytime you'll find a 2-note interval, have them name the notes just out of sequence so that they really start identifying where those notes are on the staff. Let's look at page 14. This one, Don't Stop Believing, they've just learned G major. They've learned the primary chords in G major, and so now we're going to use them in a pop song. And something that I found in arranging a lot of these things is, for instance, Alfred's Basics is very careful in setting up learning chords, especially when you look at the adult method. We get to chords very quickly. When you're learning the chords in Alfred's Basic, a lot of times they're in 1, 4, 5, 7, 1, and they're in very close position, which would allow us to play a wide variety of music. Unfortunately, the pop music nowadays does play the 1, 4, 5 chords, but not necessarily in the same inversions. So it doesn't quite sound right. They avoid a 5, 7 chord like the plague. So I have to figure out how to introduce the chords into these songs and the triads into the songs in a way that doesn't sound like it's forced. This is Don't Stop Believing. If you'll notice, sometimes there's a triad, sometimes they're not. I avoid the triads they haven't learned. So if I'm moving with just the plain intervals, I'm setting it in a way so that it's not something that's surprising to them. I also weave in 3/1. We've learned the G major scale. So in the transitions from one, maybe the verse and the chorus, you'll find these little things that allow the students to work on those scales as they're going through the pieces. You Raise Me Up on page 16. This goes along, it's an extended position. We're in G, and with that extended position, basically a second inversion triad, it matches the Red River Valley. But not every kid's going to necessarily want to be super excited about that one. So how about a Josh Groban piece? And it goes on with playing this one. Let's go to each of these versions, not each of these versions, but there's a couple of different Star Wars arrangements for it. We know that there will always be Star Wars movies, and one of the most popular requested this year of published music was once again the Star Wars theme for doing it. So there's arrangements of it at kind of different levels, an earlier level and then skipping a couple of levels and going on, in case they want to learn it when they're at that age level where they see that. Page 22 with the Star Wars on the main theme. Here we have learned the D major, the key of D major, and we're going to still double the values of the time signature to make it much more readable, but it still allows the student to play the piece very easily without having learned triplets. And it goes on from there. Let's turn to the yellow book, which is level 3. So basically we've gone through the keys of C and G, and now we're going to enter into D majors, the new key that's introduced in level 2. After that, we'll move into more flat keys, the F, D minor, and B minor, well, which is not a flat key. But in the level 3, we are just introducing ourselves to the D major and really working on that. Let's turn to page 4. Let me get this here. One of the challenges on keeping the students interested is they want to hear the latest hit necessarily, but also as soon as that latest hit is overdone, they don't ever want to hear it again. So I got to be careful on really choosing the songs that are going to stick with the students, I think, long enough, or that make nice enough musical arrangements. This is a Justin Bieber song, What Do You Mean? And I set it in a way where we're really working on the pedaling. So every time you hear What Do You Mean, the pedal goes down. And what we're going to explain to the student is the mechanics of the pedal. When it goes down, it opens up the strings. It sounds fuller. It sounds a little bit richer. Even if we're not playing further would we strike that chord. It just opens up that sound. So it makes that What Do You Mean a little more expansive on each of those measures. On a kind of a slower pop song, really good way to work on phrasing because it's a little more intimate, I think, for the students. What do you mean? And you just think, well, what does that say? How would it be sung in the pop song? On how you relate and get that. Now let's work on how do we shape that phrase to make it work in that capacity. Let's look at the See You Again. This is on page 4. This is from one of those Fast and Furious. We're passing the thumb under 2. So we have a very simple example of a movie theme that's going to utilize some of the things we're just working on. And it goes on with that and repeats again. The thing with the pop music is finding a way to keep all those concepts that were being introduced and keep putting them into the pieces here and there so that the student is always having something that's not too challenging, but that would allow them to utilize what they're working on. Turn to page 10, When She Loved Me. This one, if you were working with the lesson books, do you remember Make Up Your Mind, that major minor one? I paired it with this one. It has some of the same kind of motions to it, but this one's also about the chromatic scale. It's all in the left hand. The advantage we have with a piece like this is the student knows how it's supposed to sound. So they can kind of tell how it should be, whereas if they're learning a piece that they're not familiar with, it's a little tougher because they don't know if they're learning it wrong or not. Triads. One advantage that is getting into these pop things, because as I mentioned before, they're not landing in the really 1-4-5 that older music sort of has. So you have a lot more moving around within the piece, which is great. If you look at a lot of the lesson or recital pieces, they are sticking very closely to where you're working on because it's a natural progression. So this allows the student to have to really think about where they're moving to and what those notes are in those situations that they're playing. There's the Hedgwick's theme on page 12. And this, one of the other challenges is that not every piece now is written with just triads. So there's some intervals that are being used. You don't have to question what the harmony is, but it still gives that sound. Otherwise, the student will say that, well, this doesn't sound right. And then goes into a faster section. Just give variety on it, but it's still in the same. It's still in the same Harry Potter realm. Let's look at Run with the Herd. This is from The Good Dinosaur. It's very funny because I wouldn't say The Good Dinosaur is one of those animated films that everyone's like, oh yeah, that was the biggest hit of the century. Oddly enough, though, as far as critics that have lined it up, it's one of the most popular and considered one of the best well-made movies. It's basically a Western. So I pulled out the melody in this. It was in 3/4 time. It allowed me to play in D major, but it also allowed me to kind of move away from it. If you'll notice in the third system, we're going into 4/4. So we're going to play in 3/4. We're going to move into 4/4. It sounds very Western, right? When we get into that. The next page, James Bond, we're in D minor. Got to have different versions of James Bond. They come out with it as one of those classics, sort of like Pink Panther and Star Wars, that some, especially adults, but they feel like they've learned something really substantial when they've learned James Bond theme. Here, it's really about these expanding intervals in the left hand. And I want to make sure it's not too hard for them. Pretty workable for them, but it still has the elements of what the student would expect from the original. And then lastly, in this book, I went back once again to, I guess, the early 70s, and I took the introduction to a very, very popular piece called Color My World. I remember this, I guess this was in 1978, because that's when I graduated from high school, and this was at every prom. So the Color My World was the prom theme for years. But I took the beginning because it was so perfect for broken chords. It was also perfect for 6/8 time. It allows the student to really move around and work on the triads. Now this is something an adult in the next room goes, oh, I know that one. But it's also just a very pleasant sounding for doing that. So I kind of went through the course. If you have some questions on Alfred's Basic, the popular hits, they go up to levels 4 and 5 currently. We'll do a level 6 on those. We're always trying to do the more current add-ons so that the kids can have a choice on what they're kind of doing for fun with the course. But if you remember that at the beginning, I mentioned that Alfred's Basic, we have the early beginner with the prep course, the regular course, and then the later beginner with the complete levels and the all-in-one course. And then also the adult course, which moves faster into chords and allows the adults playing really the same methodology as all of Alfred's Basic Piano Library, but allows the adult to play in chords much faster in the progression. So if you have any questions, you don't? Yes?
Is there a book with just classical music?
Yes, the repertoire book has classical selections. On that little sheet that you see there, look in the third column on the bottom, and you see repertoire, the third column on the bottom. And that's standard repertoire there. If you have, for instance, an adult that wants to play, kind of classical themes, but they're not up to par, as far as what they've learned, in the first column, you can see classic themes there. Those are arrangements of Mozart or whatever it may be. So those you really are jumping into with the repertoire books, the standard repertoire. The recital book, not to be confused, the recital book that is considered one of the core books, those are all original pieces, as well as the fun book, original pieces that go along with it. Oftentimes with methods, you're more effective if you're actually writing music for the concept rather than finding a piece that goes, into it. But we try to balance it in Alfred's Basic with all of them. I'm going to end with a piece from Beauty and the Beast, the new one, where he's complaining at the top of the tower because she ran away and whatever. All that stuff called Evermore. But I want to thank Sheet Music Plus for having me out. It was a pleasure. I very rarely see San Francisco and didn't see much of it, but it was a real pleasure. Evermore is in the latest book that's come out of popular hits, level 5. It's in A major, which is a key that they're learning in it. And I tried to set it up where I can keep the qualities of what's going on between the melody and the harmony. And a lot of times I will use both hands for the accompaniment part and then go back to the melody. It's all learned by the student already in the lesson books, but it's a way of making the piece sound fuller than if I just have melody with accompaniment below. So this is Evermore. It's the new song from the Beauty and Beast movie. And you can say I played like a beast. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.